Thank you for joining the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Northwestern Division for our monthly Missouri River Basin Water Management Conference call. We plan to host monthly calls through early July. The next call will be held on Tuesday, June 6th at 1 p.m. If basin conditions warrant an ad hoc call due to unexpected changes, we will notify the region of the additional call. These calls are provided as a courtesy to congressional representatives, tribal and governmental officials, and the media. I am Eileen Williamson, and I will be moderating today's call. As a reminder, we are offering the presentation materials via webinar. The webinar address is www.webmeeting.att.com. The meeting number is the same as the toll-free conference number, 888-204-5984, and the webinar code is the same as the conference call access code, 3052336. These calls are recorded and placed on the Defense Video and Imagery Distribution System at www.dvidshub.net/unit/USACE-NWD, and on iTunes you can search Missouri River Basin. Your participation in today's call acknowledges your consent to be recorded. All lines have been placed on mute during this call. So to unmute your line and ask a question or to do your presentation, press *6. Please be aware that the forced mute function does not work on all phones. So if I ask, please use your phone's own mute function to avoid interrupting the call. Please do not place it on hold. For the convenience of our media representatives, the final slide in this presentation includes each speaker's name, title, and contact information. The agenda and presenters for today's call will be as follows. Doug Cluck, NOAA National Center for Environmental Information, Kevin Lau, National Weather Service's Missouri Basin River Forecast Center, and Ms. Jody Farhat, Chief of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Missouri River Basin Water Management Division. With that, we'll turn it over to Doug.
All right, thank you very much. Thanks to the Corps, and thanks for everybody on the call today. We'll start with just a quick look back at temperatures and precipitation over the basin. First, for the last month or so, last 30 days. You can see on the image on the left, upper left, I guess you'd say, since early April till now, temperatures have been relatively near normal, actually, where you see the bright yellow and the actual sort of a light green color. Those are pretty close to normal temperatures. So generally slightly cooler than normal to the north and slightly warmer than normal to the south over the last 30 days on average. Looking at the image in the lower right corner, percent of normal precipitation for the same period, you'll see where it's green to purple actually, and beyond that, I guess, where some very heavy precipitation has fallen over the last 30 days, at least compared to normal. Mainly that's slightly out of the basin, I guess you could say, from southern Kansas into southern Missouri, but there certainly have been cases where above normal precipitation has fallen in the lower basin and in the upper basin in parts of Wyoming and some of the higher mountains of Montana. Next slide, please. Looking at the similar images, but from the beginning of this year, January 1st of this year till now, you'll see the temperature on the left shows you, generally speaking, that temperatures have been above normal for most of the basin, especially as you go to the lower basin, lower Missouri Basin, in Missouri, Kansas, and parts of Nebraska, and in Colorado for that matter. Upper basin have been near normal to slightly below normal, generally speaking, over that time. And also looking at precipitation, you see that it has not been a dry year across most of the basin, and certainly not in Wyoming, where they're seeing much above normal snow and rainfall, generally precipitation for that period. A little bit of dryness across portions of the Dakotas. I've not heard that has been an issue in terms of being too dry or a lot of worry about slipping into drought or anything like that. So next slide. These are the snowpack percent of normal for this time of year. And I'll just say that as we get further and further into towards the end of the snowpack year, these numbers can be quite strange and elevate pretty quickly. But I think just based upon how fast things melt off. But what I will say here is, again, you're looking at Wyoming, for example, you see that sort of deep purple color there. There is no doubt that most of those basins are much, much above normal. In some cases, record above normal. As you go a little bit to the north into Montana, you see those numbers come down a bit. Still generally above normal, but not nearly what we see in Wyoming. As you slip to the south into Colorado, due to some early warmth, I guess you could say, in March and April, a lot of the at least lower elevation, some of the upper elevation snowpack has melted off a bit. So you can see that those numbers are much closer to normal in those times. The image on the right, by the way, is from 2 months ago in early March. Pattern has shifted slightly since then, but generally you see that similar things kind of holding on there in terms of Wyoming having much above normal in terms of snowpack. Next slide. No surprise here. Even with the 20-plus inches of snow they saw in southeast Colorado and above in numbers above a foot across portions of Kansas, plain snowpack is virtually gone for the rest of at least this spring season. No surprise there, and obviously a lot of snow still left up in the higher elevations. Next slide. Looking at the next 7 days, I took this from yesterday, so these get updated at least once a day. But what I would say is this is an accumulated precipitation over the next 7 days. This isn't 1 day or 2 days. This is an accumulation over 7 days. Anyway, what you see here in the sort of darker bluish and into purple colors are heavier predicted amounts. You'll see that there are some in the lower basin in Kansas that stretches sort of northwest into Colorado and Wyoming. These are not tremendous rains. I'd say this is a fairly, especially in May, a sort of a typical amount of precipitation. Some dryness indicated again to the northern parts of the basin, but generally the mountains, the higher elevations, western basin look like they'll be getting some precipitation out of this, as well as the central plains. Next slide. This is for the period of May 12th to the 18th, so looking out a couple weeks. You'll see that on the temperature image on the left shows that there's a much greater chance than normal to have above normal temperatures across most of Montana, Wyoming, portions of Colorado, and then into the Dakotas and northern Nebraska. And then, of course, that's sandwiched between two below normal areas in the rest of the nation, which is sort of interesting in and of itself. And then as far as precipitation during this period, this week 2 period, you see there's an elevated chance for above normal precipitation, again, across basically the Rockies, the higher elevations of this basin, of the Missouri Basin, but slightly less than normal chances of above normal, or better chances for below normal precipitation across much of the eastern part of the basin as well as the lower basin. Next slide. Image on the left, again, this is for the rest of May, I guess you could say, and image on the left is for temperature, and the general indication here is that the lower basin may stay a bit cool. At least there's better chances for that, and really not a lot of indication whether it's going to be warm or cold, or near neutral for that matter, or near normal, I should say, for the most of the basin. And that's the image on the left. Image on the right is precipitation. Again, sort of a dichotomy from the lower and upper basin. The upper basin looks like there's better chances for the rest of this May to see above normal precipitation. Those chances aren't huge, but they do exist for sure. And then in the lower basin, it looks generally drier than normal. At least there's elevated chances for that. Next slide. Looking through the end of the spring into early summer, those 3 months, May, June, July, again, temperature on the left. General indications are that the probability for warmer than normal conditions definitely exists for most of the basin. That probability sort of runs into equal chances, or we don't really know, above, below, or near normal for Montana and North Dakota certainly, and portions of northern South Dakota in terms of temperature. So equal chances for above, below, and near normal temperatures in the upper basin, and most of the 2/3 or 3/4 of the lower basin being above normal chances for above normal temperatures. Interestingly, precipitation chances, if you look at the lower right image, all the way up and down the Rockies, Montana down through Colorado, there's an enhanced chance of above normal precipitation for those states, and sort of if you will, a elongated bullseye for that same area. Again, these probabilities aren't the highest, and the only thing I'll say about our summer or late spring precipitation predictions is that they're very difficult to make. So anyway, this is our best guess at this moment in terms of what that will turn out to be. We'll have an updated version of this on May 18th, which is a couple weeks from today. Next slide. Okay, and then sort of a look at the drought. I'm going to basically say there isn't much. There are some drier areas, and a little bit of what we call D1 drought in a portion of Colorado there, from sort of Denver north to oops, my screen just went off here. Hold on a second. North of Fort Collins in Colorado, but really for the most part, it is there's not really much of a dry signal across the region. And if you look to the right, that image there is sort of the outlook in terms of drought building into the area anywhere. You can see in the southeast part of the U.S. where it's yellow there, that indicates where drought may occur or develop over that period by the end of July 31st. But really, for the Missouri Basin, there's no indication right now of drought developing or being a serious issue at this point. Next slide. So here's a quick summary with a few other points kind of thrown in. The current El Nino, La Nina conditions we are in neutral right now. As I said earlier, plain snowpack. Zilch, really. The mountain snowpack, much above normal across Wyoming, above normal in Montana, and getting close to near normal in Colorado. Near normal temperatures for most of the basin over the last 30 days, generally wet except for portions of the Dakotas and eastern Montana also over the last 30 days. Predictions show that this neutral El Nino, La Nina condition that we're in right now will extend over the next 3 months for sure. There are some signs still pointing towards lapsing into an El Nino type of situation either later this summer into this fall, but no one is calling it at this moment. I would look to the June sort of outlooking forecasts, seasonal forecasts, for sort of a better idea whether that's going to happen or not. And then in terms of temperatures, enhanced warm tendencies for the north and west in the short term, equal chances for the rest of the spring. That's May, June, July. Sorry, I'm getting a kind of a cough in my throat. And for the early summer, most of the basin remains with enhanced chances of above normal temperatures, except for that northern tier. And then in terms of precipitation, sort of leans to the wet side in the western basin. Again, this rest of the spring and early summer. some dryness indicated in the eastern portion and southern basin short term, then equal chances for the rest of the late summer. And drought is not a concern at this point across most of the basin. And I believe that is all I have. Thank you very much.
All right, Kevin, I know you didn't have slides, but are you ready?
I hope so.
All right.
Okay. So you can hear me okay?
If you can get a little bit louder.
Okay. All right. Again, this is Kevin Lau. I'm with the National Weather Service Missouri Basin River Forecast Center. Appreciate the opportunity again to be with you today. I'll start in the mountains, and we hope that we have reached the peak snow accumulation in the Yellowstone and the Missouri River above Fort Peck. Indications are that we have. The biggest anomaly as far as snowpack goes is in the Yellowstone itself, where we are above average with the snowpack. Our water supply forecast that we issued, actually I guess it was yesterday, indicate that we're expecting near average to slightly above average volumes for the April through September volume for the Missouri River above Fort Peck. We are expecting above average runoff volume for the Yellowstone, about average for the North Platte, and below average for the South Platte. We have not seen much, if any, upper elevation melt yet, but there's a good chance that this weekend with the elevated temperatures, and also as Doug mentioned, the rainfall event that's coming in, we expect that we will start seeing upper elevation snowmelt to begin. And with that, our biggest concern would be in the Wind River Basin in Wyoming, where we expect moderate to possibly even major flooding along the Wind River. We also expect some minor flooding in the Missouri Basin above Fort Peck in the following tributaries: the Big Hole, the Jefferson, and Clark's Fork. All of those have a good likelihood of seeing minor flooding with the melt-off. Also, the North Platte, both in Wyoming and in Nebraska, we expect to see reaches having minor flooding. And there's a good possibility that we'll also see flooding along the Platte River itself below the joining of the North and South Platte in Nebraska. There's a good possibility we'll have minor flooding in certain locations along the Platte. Other than that, the biggest news story, of course, is the tragic flooding that's occurred over the past week in the lower part of the basin. We've had major category flooding in the Gasconade, the Osage basins, and also along the lower reach of the Missouri River itself. We've had major flooding. We've busted at least 3 stage records in the Gasconade, 2 by 3 feet and 1 by nearly 5 foot. For the remainder of the spring and summer, we do look for continued episodic minor to moderate flooding in eastern Kansas, the state of Missouri, southern Iowa, and extreme eastern Nebraska, but with thunderstorm activity that is not atypical. A couple of months ago, we would have said that the area and state of Missouri had a below average risk for flooding, but now we're at, I would say, a normal to maybe slightly above normal risk for tributary flooding in Missouri and eastern Kansas. And I believe that concludes what I had to say this afternoon. Thank you.
All right, thank you, and I'll pass it to Judy.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today on the May Basin Outlook conference call. We appreciate your participation. Earlier this week, we posted the May runoff and reservoir regulation forecasts on our webpage, and we also issued a press release yesterday. So I'm going to start by having two of the senior engineers in my office talk about these forecasts that we did, and then when they finish, we'll go on and have a couple folks from Kansas City District talk about conditions in the Kansas City Basin. So we'll start with Nicole Shorney and Joel Konofchinsky.
Thanks, Jody. The 2017 calendar year runoff forecast for the upper Missouri Basin above Sioux City, Iowa, updated on May 1st, is 29.7 million acre-feet, or 117% of average. The significant forecast factors used in this forecast are mountain snowpack, recent runoff trends, soil moisture and drought conditions, and the NOAA Climate Prediction Center's monthly and seasonal temperature and precipitation outlooks. April runoff was 93% of average. Runoff was above average in the upper two reaches and below average in the lower four reaches. With regard to mountain snowpack, as of May 1st, the liquid content in the snow was 16.0 inches in the reach above Fort Peck, which is 107% of the May 1st average and 98% of the average peak. And it was 20.8 inches in the reach between Fort Peck and Garrison, which is 155% of the May 1st average and 147% of the average peak. Normally, the mountain snowpack peaks near April 15th. The mountain snowpack in the reach above Fort Peck appears to have peaked in late April, and it appears that the peak was reached earlier this week in the Fort Peck to Garrison reach. As of this morning, the liquid content in the snow for the reach above Fort Peck has declined more than an inch from its peak to 14.9 inches. The liquid content in the reach from Fort Peck to Garrison has declined about a half inch from its peak to 20.2 inches. Temperatures and precipitation over the next couple weeks could still result in more snow accumulation. As Doug mentioned, the climate outlooks through May, June, and July indicate equal chances for temperatures in Montana and North Dakota, with warmer temperatures in the rest of the basin, and a slight increase in the chances for precipitation in Montana and Wyoming. Because the 3-month rainfall outlooks indicate only slightly higher chances for above normal precipitation, the May, June, and July runoff forecasts for the reach above Fort Peck and the reach between Fort Peck and Garrison closely reflect the amount of mountain snowpack. The May, June, and July runoff in the Fort Peck reach is forecast to be 100% of average, and the May, June, July runoff in the Garrison reach is forecast to be 147% of average. In summary, the 2017 calendar year runoff forecast is 29.7 million acre-feet, or 117% of average. Based on this runoff forecast, the May 1 system storage, the tributary project storage, and Plate 6-1 in the master manual, the service level adjustment of 5,000 CFS that was made in April will continue through May. Joel will now discuss the reservoir regulation studies.
Thank you, Nicole. Reservoir system storage is currently 59.1 million acre-feet, or 3.0 million acre-feet into the 16.3 million acre-feet of available flood storage. Gavins Point releases averaged 28,500 cubic feet per second in April. In early May, releases were reduced to 21,000 cubic feet per second for several days to lessen downstream flooding. As downstream flows recede, releases will be increased to approximately 34,000 cubic feet per second by around mid-May, downstream conditions permitting, to prevent endangered lease terns and threatened piping plovers from nesting on low sandbars. These sandbars could be inundated later in the summer when higher releases are needed to meet downstream flow targets. The nesting season runs from May to late August. Moving on to the monthly simulations, the basic simulation uses the runoff forecast that Nicole just discussed. Due to the amount of variability in precipitation and other hydrologic factors that can occur over the next several months, we also develop an upper and lower runoff that are then used in the upper and lower basic simulations. These simulations provide a range of reservoir elevations and releases that may be expected under the different runoff scenarios. The discussion to follow will focus on the basic or most likely runoff forecast. Information on the other runoff simulations is posted on our webpage. Looking at the upper three reservoirs, Fort Peck is currently at elevation 2237.4 or 3.4 feet above the base of the flood control pool, which extends from elevation 2234 to 2250. It is expected to peak near elevation 2240.6 in June. Peak daily average releases are expected to be about 10,500 cubic feet per second this summer. Garrison Reservoir is currently at elevation 1841.6. It is expected to peak near elevation 1848.0, 10.5 feet into the 16.5-foot flood pool, which extends from elevation 1837.5 to 1854. Peak daily average releases are expected to be around 35,000 cubic feet per second this summer. Oahe Reservoir is currently at elevation 1608.3, 0.8 feet above the base of the flood control pool, which extends from elevation 1607.5 to 1620. It is expected to peak near elevation 1611.9, 4.44 feet into the 12.5-foot flood pool. Peak daily average releases are expected to be around 32,000 cubic feet per second this summer. Next slide. Navigation service level and season length. The navigation service level is used to determine releases from Gavins Point Dam to support navigation and to help provide an 8 to 9 foot deep navigation channel downstream. Flows at the full service level are designed to provide a 9 foot deep navigation channel. Because of the higher than normal runoff forecast, flow support was increased in April to a level slightly above full service. Based on the current forecast, that higher service level will continue with Gavins Point releases expected to be around in the mid 30,000 cubic feet per second range this summer, depending on downstream conditions. Releases will be reduced in response to downstream flooding. However, the effectiveness of the reservoir system to reduce peak stages along the lower river diminishes as you move downstream due to the travel time. The service level for the remainder of the navigation season and the navigation season length are based on the July 1 system storage. Under the basic forecast, flow support for navigation would continue at the higher service level after the July 1st storage check. Forecasted energy generation at the main stem dams for 2017 under the basic simulation is 10.6 billion kilowatt hours. This compares to the long-term average of approximately 9.3 billion kilowatt hours. Thank you, and this concludes my talk.
Okay, now we'll pass to Kansas City District. I believe we have Judd Knieven and Chris Perzer, who will provide an update on the conditions there in the Kansas City District. Star 6 to come off mute.
Yes, thank you, Jody. Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear us, Jody? Was that a yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Just in summary, the recent rains have most significantly impacted our Osage Basin projects. From the upstream to downstream perspective, the three upper basin lakes were least impacted: Melbourne, Pomona, and Hillsdale. They are currently at 20% approximately of flood control pool occupied. However, as you move downstream through the basin, Stockton, Pomme de Terre, and Harry S. Truman Reservoir range from 40% occupied flood pool to 60% occupied flood pool. Flood control releases are underway. They've been underway from Pomme de Terre, and they began today from Stockton. And flood control releases will begin after midnight tonight from Harry S. Truman Reservoir. Harry S. Truman Reservoir has been at zero release since the 29th of April in coordination with releases from Bagnell Dam, Lake of the Ozarks, and Ameren. We coordinated to begin releases, as I mentioned, beginning after midnight tonight. We will go up to 20,000 CFS through the early morning hours, and then progress toward another 30,000 CFS, and then 40,000 CFS. And we anticipate that by Tuesday, flood control releases out of Truman Reservoir will be in the range of between 40 and 50,000, in concert with releases from Bagnell Dam, such that the total flow at St. Thomas does not exceed 54,000 CFS. Moving on, the recent rains have had a lesser impact on other reservoir projects within our district. Most significantly will be the Kansas Basin, where the lower three projects of Milford, Tuttle Creek, and Perry range from 5 to 10% of their flood control pool occupied. But releases have been underway from those projects, and those recent rains had little significant impact on them. The only other project of note that I would mention is Long Branch in the Sheraton Basin in Missouri. It is a fill and spill project. It currently has 20% of its flood control pool occupied, and its releases right now are approximately 300 CFS and are anticipated to decline as the pool declines. And with that, I will turn the microphone over to Judd.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Judd Knieven. I'm the Emergency Management Chief here for the Kansas City District. And as Chris described and Kevin described, over the past week, we've been partially activated, our EOC that is, to support state and local efforts with regard to flooding, primarily focused from Jefferson City, Missouri to the mouth. As most of you know, our authority allows us to provide supplemental technical and support to state and local entities. Additionally, I'd like to remind everyone that the no-wake zone remains in place for the lower 200 miles of the Missouri River that was issued by the United States Coast Guard. So since Sunday of this past week, 13 non-federal levee systems were reported to have been overtopped. 4 of those systems subsequently suffered overtop breaches. 1 system breached prior to overtop. And we had an additional 11 that had less than 5 feet of freeboard throughout this event. All of those are expected to have some type of damage. We plan to step down to an emergency watch activation level this afternoon. We will continue at an emergency watch activation level through the weekend, and then on Monday of next week, we will reevaluate our EOC status. Over the next week, we're going to transition to flood recovery with a focus on repairing damaged levees that participate in our USACE rehabilitation and inspection program. And as a reminder, the safety of the general public is our top priority. Flooding can occur at any time, and with so many damaged levee systems, we urge everyone to pay attention to the watches and warnings issued by the National Weather Service. And that completes my update. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Chris and Judd. So in summary, we began this year's runoff season with the full flood control capacity of the main stem reservoir system available, and currently more than 80% of that capacity is remaining. The reservoirs, both on the main stem and in the lower basin, are doing what they're designed to do, which is to capture spring and summer runoff, which will be released throughout the remainder of the year to serve navigation and downstream purposes, and in the case of Kansas City, to evacuate those projects in an orderly manner to get ready for any future events. And then finally, I just want to remind folks one more time that we have this new product that we put out each Tuesday, posted on our website. It gives the status of the main stem system, the reservoirs, and the snowpack. So it changes every Tuesday, so we encourage you to take a look at that. And if you have any suggestions for improvements, please let us know. That concludes my remarks. We'll turn it back to Eileen for questions.
Okay. Questions will now be fielded by state in alphabetical order. Remember, if you have a question, press *6 to come off mute. Start with Iowa. Are there any congressional delegation members from the state of Iowa? Tribes? State officials or local government? Press. Move to Kansas. Congressional delegation members? Tribes? State or local officials? Press. Again, *6 to come off mute. State of Missouri, congressional delegation members? Tribes, state or local government officials, members of the press, Montana, congressional delegation members, tribes, state officials or local government, members of the press. Again, star 6 if you have questions. State of Nebraska, congressional delegation members, tribes, state or local government officials, members of the press. North Dakota, congressional delegation members, tribes, state or local government officials, members of the press. South Dakota, congressional delegation members, tribes, state or local government officials, members of the press. And Wyoming, congressional delegation members, tribes, state or local government officials, members of the press. Any other members of the press on the line? Or final questions before we adjourn? Again, star 6 to come off mute. Okay, with that, the next call will be held on Tuesday, June 6th at 1 p.m. Press release containing much of the information that was presented in today's call was posted and sent yesterday, and we appreciate your participation. Thank you.